The work that I do in the Department of Teaching and Learning at NYU, which is a Department of Teacher Education, is I study immigrant families in schools. I study the experiences of immigrant young people, and in particular, I'm very interested in parent involvement. And this stems from an overall interest that I have. I think I'm really curious about social inequality, social hierarchies, and the reproduction of inequality. And education is just the stage that I've chosen to look at that on. And then the spotlight is on the relationships between families and schools and how schools create openings for families to participate or not. So one of the kind of ideas that interests me in pursuing this work is the idea that was a very old idea by Willard Waller, that teachers and parents are natural enemies, because when parents hear something critical about their child, they blame the teacher. Whereas I argue that, in fact, parents, and I'm not the only one, but I argue, in fact, that parents and teachers are actually natural allies, and that they are allied around a common goal, and that is the future success of this particular child. And so I often say, when I'm talking to teachers, that you and the parents are on team, and then fill in name of the child whose parent is sitting in front of you, right? So I'm my daughter's teacher, James, and I are on team Soraya, because that's my daughter. And then James, when he's sitting with Judah's parents, are on team Judah. So it's really important. I want teachers to understand that rather than seeing themselves in opposition to parents, they should see themselves as part of the same group. And one of the things that I've learned a lot from my work with immigrant families and what they talk about as issues that they have with feeling welcome in schools is that they really want a reciprocity. They want the relationship between themselves and the school to be one where they feel like they're being supported as much as they're giving support. So Pedro talked about PS 28 as an example of a school where it's a community, the school itself is a community site and where people feel like they belong. And that's one of the most important ways that schools can begin to break down the walls that imply that there's some sort of separateness. But currently, the definitions of parent involvement that we have are mainstream ways of thinking about the first things that pop into our mind when we think about parent involvement really are upholding of some really important hegemonies like patriarchy, assuming that it's mothers who should participate in school, neo-capitalist individualism, like your goal as a parent is to get your child through and the best and the most and the best attention. So it's really emphasizing that it's about your child and not some sort of collective endeavor. And it also emphasizes white supremacy, as in there's only one way to speak to teachers. And oftentimes in the research, we see that white teachers report feeling intimidated by black families or families of color, that they feel that those families are being aggressive toward them, that they feel like those families are complaining, right? So there's a lot about our kind of generalized understanding of what the relationship between school and home should look like that is creating fissures and actually troubling the idea that we have a common humanity and people aren't really able to see each other. I'm also really interested in social inclusion and exclusion of parents with one another, and how parents who are different from one another can leave each other out or create spaces that are uncomfortable for the parents who are not like them to participate. So my strategies for working through this stuff, and I generally tend to work with teachers. I talk to families and then I sort of bring their perspectives to teachers and share with them. But I have, I think, sort of three main tenets that I try to communicate. And the first one is really about a deep inward searching that teachers, we people, need to do in order, before we can open up to love. Before we can open up to love, we have to understand what's happening with us. We have to understand where we learned things about love and conflict and people who are different from us. We have to be willing to be connected to ourselves. And I think another crisis of connection that we have, and we talked about this morning, is that we also are disconnected from ourselves. So we have to face our identities, the good, the bad, every aspect of them. We have to face our own contradictions and learn to be okay with the fact that everyone is a really complex being, including ourselves, and that means that we can't just make facile generalizations about groups like those parents. And also knowing what our triggers are, right? So knowing What are our tender spots? And how can we respond when we feel a trigger or a tender spot being touched? How can we respond not as a reaction to that, but really out of a place of saying like, okay, wow, that really upset me, and I get why that upset me, so now I'm going to be able to move from a place of understanding. So the other strategy is, you may have heard the term holding space for someone. The idea of holding space is that when someone is going through difficult time, rather than trying to fix it or tell them that they're going to get through it, you really just are there as a soft place to land, and you're a grounding place where there is no judgment and there's no need to figure out the end or try to fix things. So particularly when it comes to relationships between people who are different from each other, I see, and this is, Kent brought this up, about the need to believe in a just world. And I really see this with race relations, that when a person of color says to a white person, that thing that just happened to me, that was a microaggression, the white person's like, no, but it was because of this and it was because of that. And I don't think it's because the white person is horrible. I think it's because the white person can't live with the fact that we live in an unjust world. And I think that's where not for everyone, obviously, but that's so many of us are coming from a place of like, but that can't be true, right? And in saying that can't be true, we actually end up negating another person's experience. We actually end up saying like, no, that's not really what's happening. You're wrong. You're not seeing it in the right way. And so we deny and we want to move on and we want to negate. And so holding space, if a parent comes and feels as if the teacher has been unjust to the child, holding space is not saying, but I didn't, but I wasn't, but really is saying, okay, so what? Tell me more. I want to understand, and really feeling like you're ready to just hear and listen and take it in before you react or before you respond. Because the good and terrible news is that all of us are implicated in collusion with all of the inequalities, and I think Alicia spoke about this so beautifully this morning, that all of us are implicated, and so there's really, there's no stakes in us pretending like we're not. So we might as well just be real about it and just to hold space for each other. And then the last thing is humility, and one of the great lessons I learned about myself as a person in my 30s was that I made a really sort of catastrophic mistake in my life. And I learned that I was a person who could make that catastrophic mistake when I had been, my whole life kind of assuming that only other people could make those kinds of catastrophic mistakes. And that humility has created in me even more of a space for not judgment, because I see that most of us are, or at least none of us really knows how many steps we are from, say, like addiction, or from acts of violence, or from acts of hate. We don't know what that thing might be, right? Is it the death of a child? Is it an accident? Is it the loss of a job? What is it exactly? And so when we begin to see that we are on equal footing, right? And as I say, we're all standing on the curb, right? Nobody is like way up high. We're all on the curb, and we're all like this far from being able to drop off and kind of lose ourselves. And so if we can remember that and be humble, then it's a lot easier to come into relationships, and it's a lot easier for teachers to begin to see families as human beings and see parents as humans, as people who have complications and difficulties and who go through good days and bad days, and helps them to relate to them in a much more humane way, in a much more connected way. And that creates space for parents to want to be there. And that's their goal anyway. So.